The chandeliers of the Blackwood Hotel ballroom glittered like captured stars, casting pools of golden light over the city's wealthiest elite. Every table dripped with crystal glasses and floral arrangements so extravagant they seemed plucked from a royal wedding. Laughter floated through the air, the kind of laughter born of expensive champagne and even more expensive secrets. At the center of it all stood Lucian Rao. Tall, immaculately dressed in a midnight tuxedo, his arm draped around a young woman with a flawless smile and the kind of curves that made photographers lean in for the perfect shot. Her name was Seraphine Vale, 26, fresh-faced, ruthlessly ambitious, the newest accessory in Lucian's world of polished surfaces and predatory charm. For months now, the tabloids had feasted on their appearances. Tech titan trades in wife for younger model, one headline had screamed. Another had been more biting. From power couple to side piece power grab. Lucian didn't care. If anything, he enjoyed the spectacle. Tonight was his victory lap, the annual Blackwood Charity Gala, an event he and his ex-wife had once co-chaired. Now she was gone, and Seraphine was in her place, sparkling in a crimson gown that clung like a secret. From the corner of the room, eyes followed him. Some looked on with envy, others with quiet disdain. But Lucian thrived on being watched. For him, it was proof that he was still the center of every room he entered. What he didn't know, what no one in that ballroom knew, was that his ex-wife, Isolde Rahl, was about to change that. Just beyond the double doors, Isolde stood perfectly still, her hand resting lightly on the silk clutch she held. A year ago, she would have felt small in a moment like this, her heart pounding with dread at the thought of entering without Lucian by her side. She had been the quiet half of the Rahl marriage. Gracious, supportive, a hostess who remembered every name and every preference from the wine list to the charity auction paddle. She had lived in his shadow, and for years, she believed she belonged there. But the woman standing there now was not the woman Lucian had left. The year since the divorce had been brutal. The whispers, the pitying looks, the headlines that painted her as discarded, irrelevant, forgotten. She had grieved. She had broken, but she had also rebuilt. Not just her wardrobe or her bank account. Those had never been the issue. She had rebuilt herself. And tonight, she wasn't here to fade into the wallpaper. Her gown was the color of midnight sky, cut to perfection, shimmering with thousands of hand-stitched crystals that caught the light with every movement. It was the kind of dress that didn't just enter a room, it commanded it. On her arm was a man no one had seen her with before. Tall, with an easy confidence and a presence that drew every gaze in the room without him having to say a word. His name was Adrian Cross, a billionaire in his own right, whose private ventures in international finance had made him one of the most elusive and influential men alive. No one knew why Adrian was in New York tonight. No one knew why he'd chosen to escort Isolde Rahl into the most watched event of the social calendar. But they were about to find out. The maitre d' glanced at the pair as if sensing the moment's gravity, then pushed the grand doors open. The hum of conversation faltered. Heads turned. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to hold its breath. Isolde stepped inside, the midnight crystals of her gown winking like distant constellations. Her chin was high, her smile poised, but her eyes, steady and unblinking, were locked on Lucian. At first, he didn't see her. He was too busy laughing at something Seraphine whispered in his ear. But then a ripple moved through the crowd, a shift in attention so sudden it was almost physical. He followed the gaze of the room and froze. It had been a year since he'd seen her, a year since he'd told her she would cut out for his world anymore. She'd been pale then, exhausted from years of bending herself into whatever shape he needed. He'd expected her to shrink away quietly, to live out her days in dignified obscurity. But the woman before him now wasn't diminished. She was radiant, powerful, untouchable, and she wasn't alone. Adrian's hand rested lightly at the small of her back, a gesture that spoke of quiet intimacy and unapologetic possession. The kind of gesture Lucian used to make. The kind of gesture that made a statement without a single word. Photographers swiveled, cameras clicking in rapid fire. Somewhere in the back, a reporter whispered, "Who is he?" Another answered, "That's Adrian Cross. What the hell is he doing here with her?" Seraphine stiffened, her practiced smile faltering. She turned toward Lucien, but his eyes were locked on his ex-wife, and the expression on his face, shock, disbelief, something dangerously close to regret, was impossible to miss. Isolde and Adrian crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate. Conversations tried to resume around them, but the energy had shifted, coiling tighter with each passing second. By the time they reached the center of the ballroom, the silence was palpable. "Lucien," Isolde said, her voice calm, almost warm. "It's been a while." He searched her face for some sign of the woman he'd left, the woman he'd believed couldn't survive without him. She wasn't there. This was someone new, someone who didn't need his approval, his name, or his protection. Adrian extended his hand, his tone smooth but carrying an unmistakable edge. "We haven't met, Adrian Cross." Lucien shook it automatically, the grip firm, but his mind was racing. What was she doing here? And with him of all people? Isolde's smile didn't waver. "We just flew in this morning," she said lightly. "Adrian's jet makes the trip from Monaco quite comfortable." Lucien's jaw tightened. The word jet landed like a stone in his chest. In his circles, flying private wasn't just a luxury. It was a declaration of status. And the man she was with didn't just own a jet. He owned an entire fleet. For the first time in years, Lucien felt the balance of power shift, and it wasn't in his favor. Around them, the murmurs grew louder, the speculation sharper. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment from every angle. The once invisible ex-wife was no longer invisible. She was the center of the room, and the man who had once believed she couldn't survive without him was suddenly fighting to keep his composure. Isolde leaned in slightly, her voice just for him. "Enjoy your evening, Lucien." "We certainly will." Then she turned, her arm looping naturally through Adrian's as they moved toward the VIP table, the crowd parting before them. Every step was a quiet victory, every flash of the camera a reminder that she was not just surviving, she was thriving. Lucien stood rooted to the spot, Seraphine's voice a distant echo he barely heard. His world, the one where he was untouchable, where he decided who stayed and who went, had just tilted, and he knew it. And deep down, in a place he'd never admit to anyone, he realized he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. Before the midnight gown, the diamond flashes, and the billionaire at her side, Isolde Rahl had been just Lucien's wife. She grew up in Portland, Oregon, the daughter of a high school English teacher and a small-town carpenter. Their life was simple. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, home-cooked dinners, and summers spent hiking the Cascades. Money was tight, but love was abundant, and Isolde learned early that dignity didn't come from wealth, it came from how you treated people. In college, she studied architecture, drawn to the balance between structure and beauty. That was when she first met Lucien Rahl. He was visiting her university as a guest speaker, already a young CEO, already magnetic in a way that made the entire lecture hall lean in to hear him. Afterward, she waited in line to shake his hand, not expecting much. But when it was her turn, he didn't just glance at her and move on. He asked her name, where she was from, what she was studying. For the next 10 minutes, he made her feel like she was the only person in the room. That night, an email landed in her inbox from an assistant inviting her to a small networking dinner Lucien was hosting. She almost didn't go. She didn't own a dress she thought was fancy enough, but her roommate convinced her. From that dinner on, Lucien pursued her with a relentless charm. Flowers on her doorstep, weekend trips to the coast. He talked about his vision for the future, his plans to build not just a company, but an empire. "I need someone who believes in me," he'd say, looking at her like she was the missing piece. They married 2 years later in a ceremony overlooking the ocean. It was small by his standards, just 120 guests, but for Isolde, it felt like a dream. Her father walked her down the aisle, his eyes shining with pride. Her mother whispered, "He's a good man. You're going to have a wonderful life." In the early years, she believed it. She became the perfect partner for a man like Lucien. Poised, supportive, willing to relocate, to host, to smile for endless photographs. She gave up a promising design position to join him in the city, thinking she could always return to her career later. But later never came. Lucien's empire grew, and so did the demands on their marriage. Dinners became networking events. Vacations became business trips. Every room they entered together became a stage where she played the role of the gracious wife, even when she felt invisible in private. At first, she didn't mind. She told herself it was temporary, that they were building something worth sacrificing for. But slowly, she began to notice the cracks. He stopped asking about her day. He'd take calls during dinner. His compliments, once warm and frequent, became rare. Then came the late nights and the excuses. "I'm meeting with investors. The board dinner ran long. You wouldn't understand, Izzy. It's just business." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that the man who once held her hand on long walks and whispered plans for their future was still there. But the distance between them became a canyon. The breaking point came at last year's Blackwood Gala, the same event where she would later make her return. She'd been looking forward to it, spending weeks choosing a gown and planning the charity auction table she was hosting. But when Lucian arrived, he barely glanced at her. His attention was fixed on Seraphine Vale, a junior marketing consultant who had joined his company 6 months earlier. That night, the whispers started. She pretended not to notice the way other women glanced at her with pity, or the way Seraphine seemed to hover just close enough to Lucian to make her point. But deep down, she knew the truth. 2 weeks later, he confirmed it. They sat across from each other in the living room, the city skyline glowing beyond the windows. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look guilty. "You're not cut out for my world anymore, Izzy," he said, as if he were discussing a business deal. "You've been amazing, but I need someone who can keep up with where I'm going." It wasn't a fight. It was a dismissal. The divorce was swift, clinical. He kept the penthouse. She took a settlement she didn't even care about. And just like that, a decade of her life was reduced to a stack of legal documents and a few boxes of belongings. For months afterward, she disappeared from the social scene. She rented a small apartment in Paris where no one knew her name. She walked along the Seine in the mornings, drank coffee in tiny cafes, and let herself feel the full weight of the betrayal. There were days she couldn't get out of bed. Days she replayed every moment of their marriage, wondering where she'd gone wrong. But slowly something shifted. She started sketching again. Buildings, bridges, even gowns. She reconnected with old friends from university, people who remembered her before she was Mrs. Rowell. And one evening, at an art benefit in Monte Carlo, she met Adrian Cross. Adrian wasn't like Lucian. He didn't dominate the room, he anchored it. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. They spoke for hours about design, travel, and the quiet strength of people who rebuild after loss. He never treated her like a trophy. He treated her like a person. Over the months that followed, they became friends, then something more. Adrian saw the parts of her she'd buried, the ambition, the creativity, the hunger for more than just existing in someone else's story. When the Blackwood Gala invitation arrived in Paris, she almost threw it away. But Adrian, with that quiet smile of his, said, "Why don't we go? I have a jet. We'll make a night of it." And for the first time since the divorce, she didn't feel dread at the thought of seeing Lucian. She felt ready. Ready to walk into that room not as the woman he left, but as the woman he never thought she could become. And that's when she decided. If fate was going to give her a stage, she was going to own it. The Blackwood Hotel was more than just a venue. It was a landmark, the kind of place whose very name carried weight. Built in the 1920s, it had hosted presidents, movie stars, and royalty. Its ballroom, the Grand Marlowe, was a cathedral of opulence. 30-foot ceilings dripping with crystal chandeliers, gold leaf moldings curling along the walls like frozen vines, and marble floors polished so perfectly they reflected the light like still water. For the city's elite, the annual Blackwood Charity Gala wasn't just another event. It was the event. The one where alliances were forged over champagne, where whispered deals in corners could change the course of entire industries, where the right appearance could elevate someone into a whole new social stratosphere. For Isolde, the gala had once been a stage she knew well. She had spent years helping Lucian plan every detail, from the caviar service to the placement of the floral arrangements. She knew the ballroom's rhythm, how the music swelled just before the auction began, how the lighting shifted to spotlight the host as he took the stage, how the cameras clustered near the red carpet for the arrivals. But tonight, she was arriving on her own terms. Her car, sleek, black, and unmarked, rolled to a stop in front of the hotel's arched entrance. Outside, the sidewalk was a frenzy of flashbulbs and velvet ropes. Paparazzi leaned over barricades, barking names and questions, while attendees in couture gowns and tailored tuxedos ascended the red carpet. The moment the chauffeur opened the door, a chill of late winter air swept in, carrying with it the electric buzz of anticipation. Adrian stepped out first, his black tuxedo sharp against the golden glow spilling from the hotel. He turned and offered his hand to Isolde. The second she emerged, the cameras found her. A ripple went through the crowd. First curiosity, then recognition. A few gasps. Then the flashes came harder, faster, as if the photographers knew they were capturing something that would be splashed across headlines by morning. The gown moved with her like liquid night, its hand-sewn crystals scattering the light into tiny galaxies. Her hair was swept back in a low chignon, exposing the clean line of her neck and the diamond drops at her ears. She wasn't overdressed. She was perfectly dressed, the kind of elegance that made everything else look like an attempt. Adrian leaned in slightly, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Every eye's on you already." She didn't flinch. Good. Inside, the Grand Marlowe was alive with movement. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated between clusters of guests. Trays of champagne flutes balanced effortlessly in their hands. The scent of white orchids mingled with the warm notes of expensive perfume. The orchestra played something low and romantic, just loud enough to rise above the hum of conversation. Along the far wall, the silent auction tables glittered with prizes. A Mediterranean yacht charter, a diamond tennis bracelet, a private dinner with a Michelin-starred chef. In the center of the room, beneath the largest chandelier, a space had been cleared for dancing later in the evening. Lucian was easy to spot. He stood near the auction tables, Seraphine on his arm, his posture the same commanding stance Isolde had seen 1,000 times before. He was laughing, glass of champagne in hand, his other palm resting possessively on the small of Seraphine's back. The photographers had already clustered around him earlier. She could tell by the self-satisfied gleam in his eyes. He had no idea that was about to change. As Isolde and Adrian moved further into the room, conversations began to falter. Some guests whispered behind their hands. Others simply stared, eyes darting between her and Lucian. The tension was subtle but unmistakable, like the first drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Adrian guided her toward the VIP section, a roped-off area overlooking the main floor. The table was set for 6, but the 2 seats at the center had been clearly reserved for them. A waiter appeared instantly, pouring champagne without asking. From this vantage point, Isolde could see everything. The glossy arc of the marble bar, the clusters of investors and socialites exchanging air kisses, the ripple of silver gowns across the dance floor. And of course, Lucian, who had finally noticed her. Their eyes met across the room. His expression didn't falter right away. He was too well trained for that. But she saw it, the tiny hitch in his smile, the way his grip on Seraphine's waist shifted. Isolde took a slow sip of champagne, letting the bubbles linger on her tongue. She didn't break eye contact. "Would you like to make the first move?" Adrian asked casually, glancing toward Lucian. "Not yet," she said. "Let him come to me." The minutes that followed felt almost like a performance. She laughed lightly at something Adrian said, touched his arm when she leaned in to speak, turned her head so the light caught the sparkle of her earrings. Every gesture was deliberate, each one calculated to show Lucian exactly what he'd given up. Around them, the murmur of speculation grew louder. People were trying to place Adrian, some recognized him, others were clearly just realizing who he was. The combination of Isolde Rahl, the woman everyone thought had vanished after her divorce, and Adrian Cross, the billionaire who avoided public events, was too much for this crowd to ignore. Near the stage, the MC tapped the microphone, calling the room to order for the first auction item. But Lucian's attention was fixed elsewhere. He finally excused himself from his group, leaving Seraphine mid-conversation. She turned to watch him go, a flash of annoyance crossing her face. Isolde kept her gaze on her champagne until she sensed him near. "Isolde," he said smoothly, as if their last conversation hadn't ended with him ending their marriage. "You look different." She lifted her head, her expression cool. Different can be good. His eyes flicked to Adrian, and then back to her. And Adrian Cross, that's unexpected. Adrian extended his hand with a polite nod. Evening, Lucian. We were just enjoying the atmosphere. You've done well with the event this year. Lucian shook his hand but didn't respond to the compliment. I didn't realize you two knew each other. Isolde smiled faintly. We've gotten acquainted. It was a simple statement, but the weight of it hung between them. Lucian wasn't used to being on the back foot, and he didn't hide his irritation well. Enjoy your night, he said finally, his tone clipped. Then he walked away, returning to Seraphine, who was watching from across the room like a hawk. Isolde set her glass down, her pulse steady. She had made her entrance, and the message had been sent. This was no accidental run-in. This was a calculated reappearance, in his world, on her terms. And deep down, she knew the night was only just beginning. Lucian Rao had built his empire with the precision of a chess grandmaster and the ruthlessness of a predator. He started with a boutique software firm in his late 20s, charming venture capitalists with a smile that promised loyalty but delivered calculated results. By 35, he was a multimillionaire. By 40, a billionaire. His name carried weight in boardrooms from New York to Singapore, and his face, all sharp angles, ice blue eyes, and perfectly combed dark hair, was a regular fixture in the financial pages. But for all his achievements, Lucian's greatest asset had always been his ability to control the narrative. He didn't just win, he made sure people saw him win. The Blackwood Gala was one of his favorite stages, a place where his influence could be displayed without a single word, just a perfectly timed handshake or a subtle nod to the right people. When he'd left Isolde, he hadn't done it quietly. Oh, he kept the headlines clean, amicable parting, mutual decision. But among the elite, whispers were currency. He'd made sure those whispers painted him as the visionary who had outgrown his partner, a man whose ambitions demanded a faster pace, a younger energy. Enter Seraphine Vale. Seraphine was everything the gossip columns loved. Barely 26, she had catapulted from a junior marketing role at one of Lucian's subsidiary firms into the full glare of society's spotlight. Her background was modest, the daughter of a high school principal and a nurse from Arizona, but she'd learned quickly how to adapt. She understood the value of image, and with Lucian, she became a master at curating hers. Her Instagram feed was a careful balance of behind-the-scenes glamour and relatable charm. A shot of her in a couture gown at a rooftop gala, followed by a candid Sunday brunch post with her hair in a messy bun. She knew how to make the public feel like they were in on her story, and in that story, she was the radiant new chapter of Lucian's life. In private, Seraphine was more calculating. She paid attention to who Lucian respected, who he wanted to impress, and tailored her demeanor accordingly. At dinners with venture capitalists, she asked sharp, intelligent questions. At charity luncheons, she played the role of the attentive listener. And always she stayed close to Lucian, the perfect accessory to his image of success. But tonight, Seraphine wasn't smiling quite as easily. From their table near the auction stage, she'd watched the ripple of attention move through the ballroom when Isolde arrived. She saw the photographers turn, the guests whisper, the subtle but unmistakable shift in energy. It annoyed her. Not because she felt threatened, at least that's what she told herself, but because it disrupted the script she and Lucian had prepared for the night. They had planned to be the undisputed center of attention. Lucian, with his tailored tucks and easy charm, and she, in her crimson silk gown, cut low enough to spark a dozen camera flashes. They'd arrive together, mingle with the right donors, bid generously on a few high-profile auction items, and leave with the glow of being the most talked-about couple of the evening. But now, people were talking about her, the ex-wife, the one Seraphine had privately dismissed as dull, too slow for Lucian's world. And she wasn't alone. She was on the arm of Adrian Cross, a man whose presence could turn any room into a headline. Lucian tried to downplay it, keeping his smile in place as he sipped his champagne. But Seraphine knew him too well to miss the tightness in his jaw, the way his gaze kept sliding back to the VIP section. "She's trying to make a scene," Seraphine murmured, leaning closer. Lucian's eyes flicked to hers. "She won't." "You sound sure," she said, her voice light but edged. "She's not like that," he replied. Isolde never had the stomach for public confrontation. But even as he said it, A flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Across the room, Isolde was laughing at something Adrian said, her hand brushing his sleeve in a gesture that was casual yet intimate. The light from the chandelier caught in her earrings, and for a moment, Lucian remembered buying her the very first diamond she ever owned. A simple necklace, back when they couldn't afford much else. He pushed the thought away. This wasn't the time for nostalgia. The MC announced the first auction item, a week-long villa stay in Tuscany. Lucian clapped politely, placing a casual bid that he knew would make the rounds in tomorrow's society columns. Seraphine smiled for the cameras, her hand resting on his arm. But her gaze kept darting toward the VIP table, toward Isolde and Adrian. "She's enjoying this," Seraphine said under her breath. Lucian didn't answer. He was watching Adrian. The man was everything Lucian wasn't, understated yet powerful, known for avoiding the spotlight yet possessing influence that stretched quietly across continents. His decision to appear here, and with Isolde of all people, wasn't random. It was deliberate. Lucian wasn't used to feeling like someone else was pulling the strings. By the second auction item, the tension had woven itself into the air between them. Seraphine kept her smile fixed, but her nails dug lightly into Lucian's sleeve. "Maybe we should leave early," she suggested. Lucian shook his head. "We leave now, it looks like we're running, and I don't run." Instead, he decided on something else. He would reclaim the room. A carefully timed approach to Isolde, a subtle reminder to everyone watching that he was still in control of the narrative. When he finally made his way across the ballroom, Seraphine stayed behind, her expression composed but her mind churning. From her seat, she could see them. Lucian leaning in slightly, Isolde looking up at him with that maddening calm, Adrian sitting back with the relaxed ease of a man who didn't need to prove anything. The sight made something sharp twist in her chest. She told herself it was just strategy, that this was about maintaining their image. But deep down, she recognized a pang of something she didn't want to name. Across the room, Lucian returned to their table, his jaw set. Seraphine poured him a fresh glass of champagne, her voice low. "Well? She's different," he said finally, his tone unreadable. "And Adrian Cross isn't here by accident." Seraphine's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then maybe we should start thinking about what she wants, and how to make sure she doesn't get it." Lucian didn't reply. He just lifted the glass to his lips, his gaze drifting back to the VIP section, to the woman he had once dismissed as incapable of keeping up with his world. And for the first time in years, Lucian Rahl felt the ground beneath him start to shift. The Blackwood Gala had a rhythm. Cocktail hour, silent auction, dinner, then the live auction and speeches. But tonight, the rhythm faltered. It wasn't in the music or the schedule. It was in the air. Every table seemed to be talking about the same thing. Isolde Rahl is here, with Adrian Cross. By the time dessert plates were cleared, the tension was tangible. Even the orchestra's elegant waltz couldn't mask the undercurrent of whispers. The MC took the stage to announce the live auction. Lucian, ever the showman, had arranged to present one of the star items, a weekend on his private yacht, complete with crew, champagne, and a sunset dinner cruise along the Amalfi Coast. It was his way of reminding everyone he was still the man who could offer the most dazzling experiences. A man worth knowing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC boomed, "please welcome to the stage our generous donor for this evening's most exclusive package, Mr. Lucian Rahl." Applause rippled through the room as Lucian rose. Seraphine adjusted the train of her gown and placed a hand on his arm as they walked toward the stage, cameras tracking them like predators. From her seat in the VIP section, Isolde sipped her champagne, watching with the same calm detachment she might use at a play. Adrian sat beside her, one leg crossed over the other, his gaze steady on the stage. Lucian stepped up to the podium, all confidence and charm. "Thank you for that warm welcome," he began, flashing a practiced smile. "This gala is about generosity, and I'm proud to contribute something truly special tonight." He went on, describing the yacht's luxurious cabins, the Michelin-starred chef, the way the Mediterranean sunset turned the sea into molten gold. His voice carried easily across the room, smooth and controlled. And then it happened. The MC, perhaps eager to stir the bidding, invited Lucian to point out someone he thought might enjoy such a trip. It was a harmless ploy, a way to nudge donors into competing. Lucian's eyes swept the room. and landed on Isolde. There was a beat too long before he spoke, but when he did, his tone was light, almost teasing. "Perhaps my ex-wife could use a little getaway," he said, gesturing toward her with an elegant sweep of his hand. "After all, she's been working so hard at relaxing." A low chuckle ran through the crowd. Not everyone laughed, but enough did for the sting to land. Isolde's spine straightened, but her expression didn't change. Adrian, however, set his glass down with deliberate care. The MC, sensing an awkward edge, tried to move on. "Well, perhaps Mr. Cross might outbid the rest of us for such an opportunity," he joked, and the cameras swung toward their table. The moment was live-streamed on the gala's social feed, the image of Isolde and Adrian projected onto the ballroom's massive screens. Isolde leaned toward the microphone held out by a passing server. Not an official part of the program, but no one stopped her. Her voice was calm, but it carried through the room. "Thank you for the offer, Lucien," she said evenly. "But I'm afraid Adrian and I already have plans for the Amalfi Coast next month, on our yacht." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Cameras flashed in rapid-fire bursts. Adrian smiled faintly, leaning into the mic. "And ours actually sails faster?" Laughter erupted, but this time it wasn't at Isolde's expense. Lucien's smile faltered for the briefest second before he recovered. "Well then, I suppose we'll have to find another lucky couple." He turned back to the podium, his voice smooth, but the damage had been done. Isolde could feel the shift immediately. The whispers were different now, tinged with amusement and admiration. She hadn't just deflected his jab, she'd turned it into a public win. As the bidding began, Adrian leaned toward her. "I think that's what they call checkmate," he murmured. She smiled, but her eyes stayed on Lucien. "Not yet." The live auction rolled on, but the energy in the room had changed. Lucien made it through his segment, but his usual command of the audience felt forced. When he returned to his table, Seraphine's smile was tight. "You shouldn't have mentioned her," she said under her breath. "She got lucky," Lucien replied, though he didn't sound convinced. Across the room, Isolde's phone buzzed. A message from one of the gala's photographers. That moment was gold. "Mind if I send it to the press?" She didn't reply, but she didn't need to. The story would be out before the night was over. As the evening wound down, guests began to circulate again, some stopping by the VIP section to greet Adrian and, by extension, Isolde. A well-known art dealer congratulated her on the comeback of the year. A tech CEO whispered, "That was brilliant," before moving on. Lucien watched each interaction with the kind of quiet frustration he rarely allowed himself to show. This had been his night. Now it belonged to her. The final blow came during the closing toast. The MC raised his glass to generosity, community, and unforgettable evenings. Adrian, ever the gentleman, clinked glasses with those around him before standing. "I'd like to add something," he said, his deep voice drawing instant attention. "Tonight reminded me that the most valuable thing we can give isn't money or luxury. It's respect. To those who have earned it, and to those who never stopped deserving it." He glanced toward Isolde, and though he didn't name her, every person in the room knew who he meant. The applause was loud and genuine. Lucien stayed seated, his jaw tight. Seraphine shifted beside him, her eyes darting between him and the standing ovation across the room. When the orchestra struck up its final piece, Isolde and Adrian made their way toward the exit. Cameras followed them, capturing every step. At the doorway, Isolde paused, looking back just long enough to meet Lucien's gaze. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because in that moment, every person in that ballroom knew. The power had shifted, and Lucien Rao wasn't the one holding it anymore. The applause from the gala still echoed in Isolde's ears long after the limousine door shut behind her. Outside, the city glittered. A million points of light scattered across the skyline, but the warmth she'd felt inside the ballroom was already fading. Adrian sat beside her, relaxed, scrolling through his phone as the car moved through the streets. "You handled yourself brilliantly," he said without looking up. "Did I?" she murmured. She could still feel the heat of 100 eyes on her, the weight of whispers that had turned from pity to fascination in a single evening. She'd played her part, hit her marks, even scored the kind of public win most people only dream of. So why did she feel hollow? When Adrian dropped her at her apartment, she smiled and thanked him, promising to call tomorrow. But the moment the elevator doors closed, the smile slid away. By the time she stepped into her flat, the silence hit her like a physical thing. It was too quiet. The room still carried the faint scent of the candles she'd burned earlier in the week, but they felt lifeless. Just pretty walls with nothing anchoring them. No laughter, no conversation, just the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She kicked off her heels and sank onto the couch, her gown pooling around her like spilled ink. The adrenaline from the night drained out of her all at once, leaving behind an ache that felt older than the divorce. The truth was, the gala hadn't been about Lucien. Not really. It had been about proving something to herself. But one night, no matter how glamorous, couldn't erase the months of humiliation, the endless self-doubt, the quiet mornings where she'd stared at her own reflection, wondering if maybe he'd been right. She'd lost more than a marriage when Lucien left. She'd lost the version of herself who believed she was enough. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. A flood of notifications lit up the screen. Tagged photos, news articles, congratulatory messages from acquaintances who hadn't spoken to her in a year. "You were amazing tonight. You looked incredible. Lucien must be dying." She read them all, but they felt strangely distant, like praise for someone else. Then, a new message appeared. From Lucien Rahl, subject dinner, message, "We should talk. I'll send a car tomorrow." Her stomach turned. It was classic Lucien. No question, no invitation, just a declaration as if she were still an accessory to be summoned. For a brief, dangerous second, she imagined showing up, leaning across the table, and telling him exactly what she thought of him. But she deleted the email instead. The next morning, the headlines hit. Photos of her and Adrian walking into the gala, her gown catching the light like stardust. Adrian's hand at the small of her back. Another shot captured her response to Lucien's vacation comment. Champagne glass in hand, eyes cool and unflinching. The captions were brutal for Lucien. Ex-wife steals spotlight and the last word. Rahl's big night overshadowed by stunning return. The internet loved it. The clip of her microphone moment was already trending, spliced into TikToks with captions like, "When your ex thinks he's still in control." Adrian called around noon. "Have you seen the coverage?" "I've seen it," she said. "They're eating it up. This could open doors for you," I sold. "Opportunities, partnerships." She cut him off gently. "Adrian, I appreciate it, but right now I need a minute." And she did. Because as much as she'd enjoyed the victory, she knew better than anyone that headlines fade. Public sympathy is fickle. If she wanted to rebuild her life, really rebuild it, she couldn't do it on borrowed moments in someone else's spotlight, even Adrian's. That afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table with a notebook and pen. It had been years since she'd written anything by hand, but the blank page felt honest in a way a laptop screen didn't. She wrote down one question. What do I want? At first, the answers were surface level. Security, independence, respect. But as she kept writing, other things surfaced. Designing again, traveling without an agenda, waking up in a space that felt entirely her own. She realized she hadn't thought about architecture in months. Not since before the divorce. She'd let herself drift into a life that revolved around someone else's ambitions, then into a survival mode that left no room for her own. That night, she dug out an old portfolio from a storage box. The leather cover was worn, the edges frayed, but inside were designs she'd forgotten she'd even created. Sketches for homes that blended clean, modern lines with warm, livable spaces. Flipping through them, she felt something she hadn't in months, a spark. The next day, she called an old friend from design school, now running a boutique architecture firm in the city. They met for coffee, and within an hour, her friend offered her a consulting project. It's not huge, she said, but it's yours if you want it. She did. For the first time since the marriage ended, her days had structure. She woke early, sketched at her kitchen table with coffee steaming beside her, met with clients, and lost herself in the rhythm of problem-solving. How to balance light, flow, and purpose in a space. But progress wasn't linear. Some days, the old doubts crept back in. She'd scroll past a photo of Lucien and Seraphine on a yacht somewhere warm and feel the sting of comparison. She'd wonder if people still saw her as the ex-wife rather than as her own person. One evening, after a long day at the drafting table, she received a text from Adrian. "Private dinner Friday? Just us. No press." She hesitated, then typed back, "Yes." That Friday, over candlelight and wine, Adrian asked her something no one else had. "What's next for you, Isolde?" "Not in the papers, not in the gossip. For you." She thought about it, really thought. "I don't know exactly," she admitted, "but I know I'm not going back to who I was before, and I'm not letting anyone decide my story for me again." Adrian's smile was small, but it carried a warmth that settled into her bones. "Then it sounds like you're already halfway there." Walking home that night, the city air cool against her skin, Isolde realized the truth. The gala had been a moment, but moments fade. What mattered was what she did next. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the answer. Because she understood now that the real revenge wasn't just being seen. It was becoming someone impossible to forget. It began as a whisper, the kind of rumor that slips through the cracks of polite society and starts making the rounds in hushed conversations. At first, Isolde ignored it. She was busy with her consulting project, poring over blueprints late into the night, her hands smudged with pencil graphite. The gossip mill felt like a distant, irrelevant world. But then Adrian called. "Have you heard about Lucien's company?" he asked. She set her pencil down. "No." "Why?" "There's an internal audit underway, something about misreported earnings." Her first instinct was disbelief. Lucien was arrogant, yes. Manipulative, absolutely. But sloppy? Never. His public persona depended on perfection, the kind that made investors sleep soundly at night. "I thought his financials were solid," she said slowly. Adrian hesitated. "They were. Or at least they looked that way. But I have a contact on his board. They've been uncovering irregularities. Let's just say, if this comes out, it won't just hurt his company. It'll ruin him." Isolde sat back in her chair, the information sinking in. She didn't feel joy exactly. It was more complicated than that, a mix of vindication and something that felt dangerously like opportunity. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you need to know that his power isn't as untouchable as it seems," Adrian said. "And because, well, you're not the only one he underestimated." For the next week, she kept her focus on her work. But in the back of her mind, the thought of Lucien's possible downfall lingered like a half-finished sentence. Then, at a meeting with a new client, she got her answer. The client, a philanthropic foundation looking to build a new art center, mentioned they'd once considered partnering with Lucien's firm. "But our due diligence raised too many questions," the woman said, lowering her voice. "We've been hearing things for months. If I were you, I'd keep my distance." That night, Isolde went to dinner with Adrian again. Between bites of seared salmon, she asked, if someone wanted proof of what's going on with Lucien's company, how hard would it be to get? Adrian studied her for a moment, then set down his fork. "Hard? But not impossible. Why?" "Because," she said, leaning in slightly, "there's a difference between watching him fall and making sure he never gets up again." It was the first time she'd said it out loud, that she wanted more than just a life without Lucien. She wanted a life where he could no longer rewrite the story to suit himself. 2 weeks later, she had it. Adrian didn't tell her how he got the files, and she didn't ask. What mattered was that they were real. Falsified quarterly reports, hidden losses, undisclosed debts, the kind of evidence that could turn a boardroom against its own CEO overnight. When she opened the folder, the weight of it pressed down on her. This wasn't petty revenge. This was career-ending. She could have gone straight to the press, but Isolde had learned something in the past year. Timing was everything. The next Blackwood Foundation board meeting was scheduled for the following month. Lucien would be there, Seraphine by his side, expecting another evening of influence and admiration. That's when she decided. The reveal wouldn't happen in a shadowy leak to a journalist. It would happen where the right people could see her, where Lucien would have to look her in the eye as the walls closed in. In the weeks leading up to the event, she played the part perfectly. She attended small gallery openings, appeared at charity luncheons, and smiled for the photographers who caught her leaving dinners with Adrian. No one suspected she was sitting on a bombshell. Even Adrian seemed impressed. "You're calm for someone about to drop a grenade," he said one evening as they reviewed the final details. "I've been calm before," she replied. "The difference is, this time, I'm not the one waiting for someone else to pull the trigger." The night of the board gala arrived cold and clear. The event was smaller than the charity gala, fewer cameras, more tailored power suits. The kind of room where reputations were made or destroyed in quiet conversations. Isolde arrived in a deep emerald dress that caught the light like water. She didn't head straight to the main floor. Instead, she asked a staff member to deliver a sealed envelope to the chair of the foundation's finance committee. Inside, a neatly printed executive summary of the evidence Adrian had obtained. From across the room, she watched as the chair, a silver-haired woman with a reputation for zero tolerance, opened the envelope, scanned the first page, then immediately signaled for 2 other board members to join her. The ripple began. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Lucien was mid-sentence with a cluster of donors when one of the board members approached him. Isolde couldn't hear the words, but she saw the shift in his expression, from charm to confusion to something colder. Seraphine touched his arm, but he brushed her off and followed the board member toward a side room. The door closed behind them. For the next half hour, the tension in the ballroom thickened. People glanced toward the closed door, whispered, speculated. When Lucien emerged, his expression was tight, controlled, but there was a stiffness in his posture that hadn't been there before. Seraphine was nowhere to be seen. He scanned the room and found Isolde. Their eyes locked. He didn't approach her. He didn't have to. She saw it in his face, the realization that she had done this and that he couldn't prove it. She lifted her champagne glass in a small, almost polite toast. The rest of the night unfolded in polite chaos. Conversations turned toward what this could mean and how quickly things can change. The whispers weren't about her anymore. They were about him. When she finally left, Adrian was waiting by the door. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" he asked. Isolde smiled faintly. "I was ready the day he told me I wasn't cut out for his world." Outside, the night air was sharp, carrying the hum of the city. For the first time in years, she felt no shadow following her, no weight on her chest. Because she knew that the man who once believed he controlled everything had just learned the one truth he could never undo. Sometimes the person you discard is the one who ends you. 2 weeks after the boardroom bombshell, Lucien Raoul's name was no longer synonymous with stability. The financial press was circling like sharks, each headline more pointed than the last. Investors were concerned, analysts were reassessing, and his company's stock price was beginning to slip. Isolde didn't need to read every article. She knew the pattern, the slow unraveling before the public collapse. But she didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. She'd learned the hard way that revenge alone didn't rebuild a life. Her focus was elsewhere. Each morning she woke before sunrise, made coffee in her small Paris kitchen, and sat at her desk with the windows open to the street below. She worked on her architecture projects, not just the boutique consulting job she'd taken on, but new designs of her own. Homes with sweeping natural light, community centers that blended beauty with practicality, buildings that could become landmarks in their own right. She had meetings with investors who respected her, not for her last name, but for her ideas. One afternoon, she found herself standing in an empty lot on the edge of the Seine, running her hand along the cool stone wall that would someday form the entrance to her first independent project. The thought made her pulse quicken in the best way. And she changed more than her work. Her wardrobe shifted from the careful, understated elegance of Lucien's world to something bolder. Colors that made her skin glow, silhouettes that felt powerful rather than decorative. She cut her hair shorter, the new style framing her face and making her eyes seem brighter. She began saying no to invitations she would once have felt obliged to accept. No to luncheons with people who had vanished when her marriage ended. No to charity events hosted by those who had whispered about her in corners. Instead, she said yes to things that lit her up. A week in Greece, sketching ancient ruins, a sailing course in the south of France, late-night jazz clubs with friends who didn't care how her name looked in print. Adrian noticed the shift. "You're different," he said one evening over dinner. "Good different?" she asked. He smiled. "The best kind. You're not moving to prove a point anymore. You're just moving because it's where you want to go." She thought about that long after the plates were cleared. For months, every step she'd taken had been, in some way, a reaction to Lucien. To prove him wrong, to reclaim ground she'd lost. But somewhere along the way, the fight had stopped being about him. And that was the real transformation. She was no longer living in the shadow of what had been done to her. Still, there was one more thing she needed to do. The Blackwood Charity Gala was coming up again. The same event where she had first reappeared after the divorce. A year had passed since that night, and the invitation felt like a closing circle. Adrian offered to escort her again, but this time she declined. "I think I need to walk in alone," she said. On the night of the gala, she stood in front of her mirror in a gown of deep sapphire silk. The dress moved like water when she walked, its train whispering across the floor. Her only jewelry was a single diamond ring, one she'd bought herself. The ride to the Blackwood Hotel felt different this year. There was no nervous energy, no rehearsed lines in her head. When the car pulled up, she stepped out into the flash of cameras without hesitation. Inside, the ballroom looked the same. Chandeliers casting their golden light, marble floors gleaming underfoot. But the energy was different for her. Last year she'd been bracing for Lucian. This year she was simply arriving as herself. The whispers started, but they weren't laced with pity or surprise anymore. This time they carried curiosity, even respect. Lucian was there, of course. He looked thinner, his tan gone, the confident set of his shoulders now edged with strain. Seraphine wasn't with him. The gossip had already confirmed their quiet split. When he saw her, his expression flickered, something between recognition and disbelief. She didn't stop to read it. She moved past him with a polite nod, as if he were nothing more than another guest. All evening, she moved easily through the crowd. She spoke with donors about her architecture projects, accepted congratulations from people who'd followed her work, even scheduled a meeting with a gallery owner interested in featuring her design sketches. It was clear that her presence was no longer defined by the man she'd once married. At one point, she stepped out onto the hotel's balcony to catch her breath. The city spread out before her, glittering under the night sky. Adrian joined her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You've changed the room," he said, handing her one. She took a sip, feeling the cool air on her skin. "No, I just changed myself." The room caught up. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before he added, "You know, you could walk away now, let the past stay in the past." She nodded. "I could. But there's one more thing to finish." The final act wasn't about destroying Lucian. He'd already started doing that on his own. It was about sealing her story so that no one could ever again reduce her to the ex-wife. She didn't tell Adrian the details yet, but in her mind, the plan was already taking shape, and it would unfold in front of the same audience that had once watched her lose everything. Because the ultimate transformation was just about becoming someone new. It was about showing the world, without a doubt, that she had never needed his world to begin with. The night of the Blackwood Charity Gala's second act had been chosen with care. It wasn't just another event, it was the fundraiser's milestone anniversary, promising the largest guest list in years. Politicians, media moguls, financiers, old money dynasties, all of them would be here. Exactly the audience she needed. For weeks, Isolde had been quietly arranging the final piece of her plan. The collapse of Lucian's company was already in motion, but the public still didn't know the full scope. She intended to make sure they did, not through a scandal sheet, but through an act of apparent generosity so flawless it would leave her untouchable. She partnered with the Blackwood Foundation to announce a new initiative that night, a $20 million endowment for sustainable community housing, funded in part by anonymous donors she had personally cultivated. The architectural designs? Hers. The lead architect? Eshen Hu. But there was one more twist. The launch event would include a short film showcasing the project's mission. And embedded in that film, in a way so subtle it could almost be missed, were documents and data visualizations exposing Lucian's falsified financials. They were framed as a case study in why ethical funding mattered, without ever naming him outright. But for anyone in that room, and certainly for the press, it would be impossible not to connect the dots. On the night of the gala, she arrived in a tailored black velvet gown with a high neckline and an open back, a diamond cuff glinting at her wrist. She walked the carpet alone, smiling easily at the cameras. Adrian was already inside, quietly making sure the film was cued exactly as planned. Lucian was there too, though his circle was smaller now. No Seraphine, no constant photographers, just a few allies who hadn't yet read which way the wind was blowing. He saw her enter, but unlike the year before, he didn't approach. The evening followed its usual elegant arc. Champagne, murmured greetings, the low hum of an orchestra. As dinner plates were cleared, the MC took the stage. "Tonight, we're honored to present a visionary project that will change lives," he said, gesturing toward Isolde. "Please welcome the architect behind our new community renewal initiative, Mrs. Isolde Rao." The applause was warm, genuine. She walked to the stage without hurry, her posture tall, her expression calm. She spoke briefly about the vision, building homes that were sustainable, beautiful, and accessible. "A place isn't just walls and a roof," she said. "It's dignity, and dignity should never be a luxury." Then the lights dimmed and the film began. It opened with sweeping drone shots of potential build sites, children laughing in sunlit courtyards, her design sketches overlaying real streetscapes. The audience was attentive, charmed. Then came the pivot. The narrator spoke of the danger of funding projects through unstable or unethical channels as documents appeared on screen. Quarterly reports, redacted emails, and side-by-side charts showing inflated valuations against actual earnings. No company name, but anyone who had read the business pages in the last decade knew the formatting, the style, knew they belonged to Lucian Rao's empire. A ripple moved through the room. Heads turned. Whispers began. In the shadows at his table, Lucian's jaw tightened. His hand gripped his champagne flute so hard the stem looked ready to snap. The film didn't linger. It moved on to show her team, the donors, the groundbreaking timeline. But the seed was planted, and it was already growing. When the lights came up, she smiled as though nothing unusual had happened. "Thank you for believing in this project," she said into the mic. "Let's build something worth remembering." The applause was thunderous. She stepped off the stage into a wave of congratulations. Some for the initiative, some for the obvious precision of the blow she'd just delivered. Lucian didn't come near her, but she could feel his gaze following her across the room. By dessert, the first journalists were slipping out to file early copy. Adrian caught her eye from across the room and gave the smallest nod. The message was clear. It had landed. An hour later, as she stepped onto the balcony for air, she heard footsteps behind her. Lucian's voice followed. "That was cute," he said, his tone edged with acid. She turned slowly. "It wasn't meant to be cute." "You think this will stick?" he asked, stepping closer. "You think you can end me with a slideshow?" "I don't need to end you, Lucian," she said, her voice even. "You've been doing that yourself. I just turned the lights on so everyone else can see it." For a moment, the mask slipped. She saw the man beneath the polish, angry, cornered, and afraid. "You don't belong in this world," he said finally. She smiled, a quiet, confident thing. "That's the part you never understood. I'm not in your world anymore. I built my own." She left him there on the balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance, and returned to the ballroom where people were already talking about the housing project, about her. By the time the night ended, the gossip wasn't about a feud. It was about a woman who had turned her own survival into something bigger, who had played the long game and won. And as the cameras caught her leaving, no one thought of her as an ex-wife anymore. She was the headline. The days after the gala unfolded like the slow crest of a wave. The press coverage of the housing initiative was glowing, praising its ambition, its sustainable design, and inevitably, the woman behind it. The embedded case study in the film had done its work. Within a week, Lucian's company was facing formal inquiries. A month later, he stepped down as CEO to focus on personal matters. For Isolde, the headlines weren't the victory. The victory was quieter. Walking into her office each morning to see her team already at work, hearing the hum of conversation about floor plans and community feedback, knowing she had built something from nothing that mattered to people beyond her own story. One afternoon, she visited the construction site of the first housing complex. The air was sharp with the scent of fresh-cut timber. Workers in hard hats moved like a well-rehearsed dance, and in the middle of it, a little girl stood holding her mother's hand, pointing at the half-built walls with wide eyes. "That's going to be our home," the mother said when Isolde approached. We've never had anything like this. Isolde smiled, crouching down to meet the girl's gaze. Then we'll make sure it's perfect for you. Driving away from the site, she realized something. She no longer measured her worth by the people who had doubted her, but by the people whose lives she could touch. Her personal life had shifted too. Adrian was still a constant presence, though their connection had settled into something that felt deeper than the glitter of public appearances. They traveled together, laughed easily, and talked late into the night about everything from architecture to philosophy. But he never tried to own her spotlight. He simply stood beside it, letting her light spill wherever she chose. One evening, over dinner in a quiet Paris bistro, he asked, "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" She sipped her wine, thinking about the woman she'd been the night Lucien left, stunned, hollow, afraid the world had ended. Then about the woman who had walked into that first gala a year later, armored and poised but still holding herself together by threads. And now, about the woman sitting here, no armor necessary. "All the time," she said, "but I don't think about the distance as much as I think about the direction." "And where's that?" he asked. She smiled. "Forward. Always forward." Spring came to Paris, and with it, the official ribbon cutting for the housing project. The mayor attended, as did the donors, the press, and dozens of families who would soon call the place home. Cameras clicked as Isolde stood with a pair of silver scissors, sunlight catching the diamond cuff on her wrist. "This isn't just a building," she said in her speech. "It's proof that we can take what was meant to break us and turn it into something unshakable. This community is for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong, because we all deserve a place where we do." The applause washed over her, but it wasn't the sound she carried with her afterward. It was the sight of families walking through their future homes, touching the walls, opening windows, imagining their lives inside. Later, as the crowd thinned, she spotted Lucien at the edge of the property. He looked older, though only a year had passed. His suit was still expensive, his hair still perfectly in place, but there was a looseness to his posture, a man without the invisible crown he once wore. They hadn't spoken since the gala. He walked toward her, hands in his pockets. "I heard about the project," he said. "It's impressive." "Thank you," she replied simply. For a moment they stood in the shadow of the building, the weight of everything between them heavy but no longer sharp. "I never thought you'd," he began, then stopped. "Neither did I," she said, cutting him off gently. "But I stopped thinking about what you thought a long time ago." His gaze dropped, and for the first time she felt no pull of anger, no echo of pain. Just distance, the kind that frees rather than wounds. He left without another word. As she watched him go, Adrian appeared at her side. "You didn't have to talk to him," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to see if I felt anything." "And?" she smiled, turning back toward the building. "I felt nothing, except ready for whatever comes next." That night, she hosted a small celebration at her apartment. Friends filled the rooms with laughter and music, glasses clinked, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. At one point, standing by the window with the lights of the city spread out before her, she realized she was exactly where she wanted to be. Not because of the view, but because of the life she had built around it. She didn't need to be defined by who she had been with or what she had survived. She was defined by the choices she made now, every single day. The next morning, she woke to a clear sky and the sound of the city coming alive. She made coffee, sat at her desk, and opened a blank page in her sketchbook. New lines began to take shape. A school this time, open air, filled with light. There would always be another project, another chance to create something that mattered. And as she sketched, she thought of the women who might be watching her story from afar. Women still in the middle of their own endings, unsure if there was a way forward. To them, she wanted to say, "There is. You just have to start walking." Because in the end, the truest revenge wasn't humiliation or even triumph. It was building a life so full, so vibrant, that the past became just one chapter in a much bigger book. And Isolde Ral, once discarded, now unstoppable, was already writing the next one. Because she knew the truth now, the only world worth living in is the one you make for yourself. So that's it. The story has come full circle. My dear friends, if you're still here with me right now, It means something in this journey touched your heart in its own quiet way. The Stoics say, we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. If this story reminded you of your own strength, then carry that with you. And if it stirred something inside, share it, like, subscribe, and pass it on, so more hearts can remember that healing begins the moment we choose our own path.